Hey everybody, it's Brian here with Explosive Review, and today we're going to be doing something to sort of follow up on my last video, which is installing the Mosfet right here, which we just built, this nice little device, and we're going to be putting it into this gun right here, which is my Smith & Wesson Magpul Edition AEG. I believe this is a King Arms, if I remember correctly. So what we're going to do, this is actually currently front wired, so you're also going to see how to change over a front wired gun to be rear wired. Now, the way that I space these wires, as I mentioned before, is that basically I want my Mosfet just to stick out the end of the buffer tube. So I left myself quite a bit of extra here, as you should always do, to be on the safe side. And I run, like I just said, buffer tube style batteries. So I have to leave the end of this actually sticking out of the buffer tube a little bit for reasons that I'll explain once we get into the install. But let's start breaking this gun down. I might speed this up depending on how quickly it goes and whether I decide that it's worth seeing that. So we've got our little magnetic tray here. So let's go ahead and start breaking this thing down. Now, I think, as I am saying it for the third time, that we should be able to go ahead and pull this out with a bit of force and some finagling. There we go. Alright, gearbox is out. So as you can see right now, our wire runs out the front. We're going to be changing that. And this is 14 AWG wire, so it's bigger than what's currently in here now. So let's go ahead and we'll pop the gearbox apart. So I got all of our screws out now, so we can go ahead and pop the gearbox apart. We're also going to be throwing in a metal spring guide while we're in there today, so just a little something extra. Come on. I find sometimes it's just getting them to pop initially that's a bit of a challenge, so sometimes using, I guess that we weren't totally decocked. That might be why it was difficult. There we go. That's that side. Let's get our spring out of here. Set that off to the side. Okay, so we've got a little look now at what the inside is like. So I'm just going to turn on my soldering iron here, let it get heated up. Okay, so you can see what the inside looks like now. What we're going to do is we're going to pull out. You might have to take some stuff out and just set it aside while you do this. I generally try and take out as little as possible, but it'll depend on your preference, how much you want to take out, but I think I'm actually just going to go ahead and take it all out. Probably easier for you guys to see. Okay, what do we need now? We need a small Phillips head screwdriver to pull the rest. feel very unprepared right now. I apologize that I didn't have all my tools ready, but it's been quite a while since I took this thing apart, so. Okay, so here is our trigger assembly, basically. This is what we're going to be starting off working with, but there's a few things we need to do first. Okay, so like I said, there was a few things. I sort of got all my stuff together here. Next step is going to be to plan where to cut your wires, because some of this stuff you can't wait until the end to cut. So what I usually do is I take my gearbox, I rough out where my buffer tube will be, leave a little bit extra here, try and leave a bit of slack, because you can fix stuff by just twisting your wires up in here, but you can't add extra on very easily. So basically I just take it right to here, and then what I'll do is I'm just going to cut my wires right here. Approximately where our harness is going to go. There we go. Next step is going to be to take our wiring harness here, and we're just going to desolder it. So taking these leads off, you want to be careful not to melt the plastic, but we're just going to pop those leads off. It should come fairly easily. There we go. So it's desoldered. Next thing we're going to do is going to be to prepare our newly cut leads. The way we're going to do that, we're going to strip our wires back. Okay. Oops. Sometimes working with the extra wire can be a little bit unwieldy. We're going to take our flux. We're going to tin these both. One, two, both tinned. And then we're going to attach them here. Now it's important to make sure that you have your heat shrink on there. So we'll take a little piece, cut it. Slip it over. And this is just going to help to make double sure once it's done we don't accidentally short anything out. Then what we're going to do, we're going to take these, we're going to cut these leads down to almost nothing. You really don't need very much sticking out to get a good solder joint, so make sure there's no more than what you need. Then in no particular fashion, we're going to solder these on where we took those last leads off. Okie dokie, so this is all prepared, ready to go now. So basically, it doesn't really matter which direction these leads go on. The other thing we're going to do, while we have this out, we're going to take out this, and you may have accumulated some junk in there. So just go ahead, make sure that there's no junk on your trigger contacts. You can use a little Q-tip to clean it out if you want. Not really essential. You can also take a bit of dielectric grease if you really want to put it on there. Doesn't make as much of a difference once you have the Mosfet in there though. Alright, so what we can start doing now is we can take our trigger assembly and get it in place. And get your little screw, which I almost lost. And that will also need to be in there. I find getting these trigger assemblies back in properly can be quite a task sometimes. This is actually the part of working with gearboxes that I hate the most, is actually these little trigger switches, because they tend to fall apart really easily, and I just find them difficult to work with in general. Unpleasant in general. That, get our screwdriver, and one thing that I've noticed in this King Arms gearbox over some of my other ones is that for whatever reason the screws simply are not very magnetic in it. Maybe it's just cheaper hardware than in my VFC, if that's possible, but it certainly makes it a bit more of a pain in the butt, and it's enough that I noticed. So, alright, so that's back in. We can now take our wires, push them down into the channel where they're going to run, back up, out the top here. So there we go. So this is basically wired now for our trigger switch assembly. What's going to end up happening next is that we're going to take our motor leads, and they're also going to run down through here and out of their respective holes, like such. This one we don't need to cut beforehand because we can actually deal with that once we figure out our precise motor spacing and everything. So I'm going to go ahead, get all of this laid out, and then check back. So one thing I forgot to mention that you may have to do, especially if you're stepping up to larger gauge wire, just because you've got more running through these channels, is that the spaces that the companies make right here isn't always big enough. So what I usually do is I just take a file and just kind of clear out a bit extra in that channel for the wires, as well as remove any sharp edges that I notice in there, which sometimes there is left over from manufacturing. And once you start clamping the two sides of the shell together, you can really do some serious damage if you're not careful. So I'm just going to file this out. Okay, so I got my wires laid out, and now comes the very tedious job of putting the whole thing back together. This can be quite fiddly, to say the least. So this might take me a little while to do, and might not look very graceful, but it will get done, I promise. Right, and let's get that new spring guide going. I always still wonder why they skimp with these crappy plastic ones. I mean, it's not really too much excuse. I think everything should be coming with some at least moderately okay internals these days. I mean, it's King Arms. It's not like it's, you know, a Lancer Tactical or some sort of really shoddy brand, but whatever. I guess they want to keep that upgrade market going, right? And I guess in theory, I didn't have to replace it. It was an option. Oh, that was not graceful. There we go. Back together. Check that everything still moves. There, which it does. Yeah, that piece is just being a bit finicky there. There we go. Alright, so we're going to screw this gearbox back together, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so we got our gearbox all screwed back together. So we got our Mosfet coming out the back now, our two empty motor leads coming out of the bottom. Everything is still free, moving okay. You want to check all that before you put it back in. Another thing that I forgot to mention while we were in there, if you look right down this little hole here in the bottom, you want to make sure that whatever the wires that cross over for your trigger, as well as for this motor lead, don't get in the way, so that when your motor sticks in there, you don't want your motor to be chopping up those wires, because that's going to quickly cause a short and some nasty problems for you. So yeah, you want to make sure that that's not going to happen. So what we actually do now is we start putting the gun back together, because for spacing reasons you want to actually have excuse me, sorry, your motor grip on, as well as your buffer tube for deciding spacing. So we're going to start putting this back together now. Okay, so now that's it. We're only going to bother putting one screw in for the time being. Now you take your motor and you stick it down in. And what we're doing right now is we're basically sizing up for the amount of lead that we're going to need for our wires. So if we take it, we kind of space it. Mark it. More or less. Again, if anything, leave yourself that little bit extra just in case. You can always take off, but you can't add on. There we go. Okay, now these are cut. We're going to pull our motor out if we can. Sometimes these do get a touch stuck in there. Come on. There we go. Now we're going to take our motor grip and we're going to pull it off again just to make the soldering process easier. Going to get some heat shrink. Unfortunately, I'm out of the real proper size for doing this, so I have to use slightly oversized heat shrink for this step. I'm going to take it, cut it in half, put one on each side. Next step is to take our new motor leads and size these while it's out here. Sometimes you gotta force them on there the first time. Just make sure that they both fit. Okay. Now we're going to remove this plastic housing. Unfortunately, this is a little bit of a saga in unfortunate parts sourcing, but for these, I was trying to find them from a local supplier. Everybody was out of stock of the 14 to 16 gauge size. I go online, find some on eBay. Once I finally find some, order them, wait for them to get here, and they sent me the wrong size and wouldn't refund my money, wouldn't do anything, had to file a PayPal dispute. Whole gigantic mess just for some stupid little connectors. So that was a bit unfortunate, but live and learn, I guess, right? So now we're going to take our wires, we're going to strip them back just a touch. We really don't need very much exposed here because it's just going inside of these little crimp connectors. So what we're going to do, we're going to tin both sides actually. Try not to stick the magnet to everything. Try not to get too much solder on here, just because you don't want to increase the size of this wire any more than you have to. We're going to utilize our helping hands here because this stuff does get hot. And just again, a little bit of solder in there. So once that cools, what we're going to do, get our wire, stick it in, crimp it on. If I can get some better pliers. Crimp that on there. And again, take your solder, and we're going to really make sure that's a good positive connection. And because our two sides were tinned, this should be unbelievably solid now. Now we can take our heat shrink, and we're actually going to put it right up over the top and melt it on. Well, not melt it, shrink it. Getting over dramatic here. As you can see, and as I said, unfortunately I did not have the proper size of heat shrink with me today, so I had to use some slightly oversized stuff. And this is just going to act as an insulator to make sure that we don't accidentally short anything out. It's not really going to get touched all that much either, so it doesn't have to be unbelievably secure. And then we're going to bend this over. And that is so that we can connect it to our motor. Now we're just going to repeat the process on the other side, and I'll check back when it's done. Okie dokie, so as you can see, everything is in there now. Both of these leads are soldered, sealed, so now we should, with any luck, be able to put our motor in as such, attach our leads, which should go on nice and tight because they're brand new. I see these crazy prices out there for, you know, these purpose-made motor leads that are gold plated and shiny and fancy, when really all you need is the hardware store equivalent, in my humble opinion at least. Now we can take this, fit that in, screw it on down. Ugh, the magnet attacks. And screw some more, and some more, Whammy bammy. So there we go. There's our completed motor grip done. So next step is going to be to worry about our buffer tube. So if you take a look on the back here, you'll sort of have to channel these wires up through here. And what I oftentimes recommend doing is just taking a little piece of electrical tape and just wrapping that area to help keep it from getting squished. So what we'll do, give this whole section a bit of a twist actually. Sort of tighten up all these wires together. Keep everything looking happy. Take a piece of electrical tape, cut her on down. Then we're just going to take it and we're going to wrap this section. Like I said, this is just to help protect our wires from getting cut, because this area does get squeezed by the buffer tube, just the way it is. Not a whole lot you can do about it unless you want to get crazy and start filing and dremeling and trying to clear extra space, which isn't always successful, and honestly I haven't had any problems, so just do this and you'll probably be okay. There we go. So we take our sling plate, we squeeze our Mosfet through, put it on, and as you can see, it'll be a bit of a squeeze, but it does go down. Check to make sure that nothing's getting too badly destroyed. If you want, what I think I'm actually going to do, let me see if this works. This is just a lower profile plate from one of my VFC guns, so I think we're actually going to use that instead. Yeah. That ought to help keep everything from getting destroyed. So as you can see, our placement for our Mosfet is really nice, just a little bit out the back, enough to loop it back around. Squish it down a little bit if you want to. So now what we'll do, we'll get our plate and our screw. Oh, this is one of the finickiest parts. Finickiest, is that even a word? More finicky parts of the build. We're gonna squeeze it on down in there. Sorry if I'm taking this off camera, guys. It's just it's very hard to do this portion nicely. Okay, so we're almost to our final step here, which is sizing of the leads here. So take a battery, stick it down in the end, and size this side. And snip your wires. Like so. Strip them. Like so. Get your solder. Get your flux. Pin these suckers. Cut it down a bit if you need to. Now what we're going to do, we're going to get a Dean's connector, which will be like this because we're on the motor side. Get our helping hands out, grab on, get your flux again, dip that in, and we're going to tin this side of our leads. Now make sure when you're doing this that you tin the correct side. So outside, and I'll have to flip this over. Ghetto style. There we go. You want a little bit of a blob on these because it's going to make it easier to get your wires in there. Grab a piece of heat shrink tubing big enough to fit over the leads. Again, I'm going to have to use some plus size tubing here. I need to order some more of that. I generally order it in these like combo packs from China, and then I only use a few sizes, but it still ends up being cheaper. So now if you look on the actual Dean's connectors, there is a positive and negative side, so be aware of that. Heat. There we go. So that's our positive. Take our heat shrink, hold it right up there. Shrink it over. Yeah, pretty oversized there. Kind of unfortunate, but it'll work. I'm going to flip this around, throw it back into our helping hands. Very helpful. When they don't let go, that is. There we go. Throw this side over. Shrink. And there you go. We're basically done. I do recommend testing at this point before you put anything else back together, because sometimes something does go wrong. Could be bad Mosfet, could be whatever, but this is the time to check if you're going to check. So we'll go do that right now. Okay, so I went outside, tested it, seems to be working good. So I'm sorry I can't show you in here right now. It'll be too loud. People are sleeping. It's very late at night. So, but overall, great success. Put the front end back on, reassemble, and you should be good to rock and roll. As always, this has been an explosive review. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and comment.